look into methods of research, right? Methods of research under our 9699, which is the second topic in our paper 1, Sociology, AS and A level Sociology. So, under this section, you are supposed to examine the different research methods and types of data used in sociological research, and you also have to explore, or you have to analyze their strengths and weaknesses. For us to know any sociological information, there are ways that are used or that were used to gather the information. So that's what we are going to look into. So we are going to look at the research. Yes. Let's say we, for example, heard about a recent surge or a rise in teenage pregnancies in a certain area. We can go and research about it. So the tools that we use to research is the key of this topic. That's what this topic is going to look into, right? The methods of research and key ideas for assessing the value of different research methods. And you also have to look at whether sociology can and should be based on natural sciences. That's why sociology is under what we call social sciences. When you talk of natural sciences, you are talking of biology, physics, and chemistry. You know, can we use the methods that we use in mathematics? Can we use the data collections, the graphs, you know, the cumulative frequencies that we use in mathematics in sociology? Can we apply that? It's food for thought. We look into that too. So this one carries two broad topics. The first topic will be on types of data, methods, and research design. Then the second is on approaches to sociological research. So as of today, we are going to look into types of data, methods, and research. Then we are going to look into the differences between primary and secondary sources of data and between quantitative and qualitative data. That's our lesson for today. We are going to look into primary and secondary sources. Right. So, our lesson for today, let me reiterate, is on the differences between primary and secondary data, or secondary sources of data, and between quantitative and qualitative data. So we are supposed to look into primary data, right? That's our first point. And what is primary data? It involves information collected personally by a researcher. That's primary data. So if a researcher or maybe a sociologist or a psychologist goes to a certain area to research, then that one is called what? Primary data. So the researcher may use a range of methods to gather the information. They can use questionnaires. Like questionnaires are structured questions that you can put down so that you can use to what? To ask the interviewee. They can use questionnaires, they can use interviews, they can do observational studies whereby they can go into a certain area and observe or see what is happening in that area so that they can get the information. So one of its strengths is the simple fact that the researcher has complete control over how data is collected, because they have this choice of the method to use. They have the authority to whether choose the questionnaire, they might choose the interview or observational studies. And like they know or they control how the data is collected, by whom and for what purpose. And in addition, when a researcher designs and carries out their own research, they have greater control over the reliability and validity of the data, as well as how representative it is, the primary data. But however, you find out that primary research can be time consuming. It takes time. Suppose sometimes if you want to research something, it will take your time, and you know, especially if it involves personally interviewing large numbers of people, it gobbles a lot of time, you know, time. And primary research, and you know, and primary research can also be very expensive, because when you are saying that it takes a lot of time, it means it also demands a lot of resources. Let's say you want to research about how certain people are surviving in a certain area. It means that you'll be living in that area. This means that you have to leave your original place and go to that area. You have to get accommodation. You have to get the data, mobile data. You have to get the food. You must have the clothes, everything that will make you comfortable for you to do the interview. So this all needs a lot of money, So in addition, the researcher may have difficulty gaining access to the target group. Let's say he wants to research about thugs or about gangs. It's not easy to penetrate into that. Yes, I've seen some brave journalists. You've seen some brave journalists. If you go to Darfur region, if you go where there was the Rwandan genocide, you can talk about the wars that are always constantly happening in Syria, Iraq, and Iran. But you can see journalists there with the cameras live on national television, live on Al Jazeera, live on CNN, live on BBC. Like the drones will be flying around, the bullets will be flying around, the jet fighters will be hovering above, and they will be brave enough to do that, So it's quite a risky thing, and it's not really easy. And some might research about thugs in a certain area, how they do their stuff, and it's not really easy to penetrate so that you can get that intrusive information. So some people may refuse to participate. Yes. So they may refuse to participate, or in the case of historical research, potential respondents may no longer be alive, because there are some people who will be carrying the history of a certain area and they might be dead, and that will become a what? That will become a problem. So that's it when it comes to what? To primary data. That's when a researcher personally goes to a certain area and researches about a certain issue. So we also have the what? The secondary data. Right. We also have the secondary data. So secondary data is data that already exists in some form. Take note. So primary data, you get primary data first. So those who deal with secondary data, they play around the primary data. So when you talk of secondary data is the data that is already there. So those who did the duty to gather the primary data give those who deal with the secondary data the platform to work on. So that's already exists in some form, such as documents, again, government reports, statistics, personal letters and diaries, or previous researches compiled by other sociologists. So it's like those who deal with the secondary data play around with what? With the primary data, base their works on primary data. So what are their strengths? The researcher is able to save time, money and effort by using what? Existing data. So that's the difference with what? With the primary data. Because with the primary data, you are starting things from scratch, from zero. But with the secondary data, you already have the information. Then you are trying to play around with it. So the existing information, like official government statistics about crime, marriage, or divorce. There may also be situations where secondary data is the only available resource, such as when researching suicide. And secondary data is also useful for historical and for comparative purposes. Let's say you are researching about something which happened in 1955. Let's say it's a death rate, right? A 1955 death rate. You might want to compare it with the 1975 death rate. It means you should have the records for 1955 and also the records for 1975. That's the advantage. You have somewhere to compare, right? Yes. So another thing is some forms of secondary data, such as official statistics, may be highly reliable because the data is collected consistently in the same way from the same source. Like when we talk of the what? The census, right? Census is whereby people are counted, right? After a 10-year interval. So it means the next census is in 2032. Yes. I witnessed the 2002 census, then 2012 when I was in Form 6, then 2022, then 2032. That's the next, that's where we get the next census. So it's like the information is consistently there after a 10-year what? Interval. You know. That's like the understanding. Right. So, however, secondary data is not always produced with the needs of sociologists in mind, because since we are sociologists, we want information which favors us. But sometimes, when this information is being gathered, it doesn't have us in mind. For example, official definitions of poverty, class, or ethnicity may be different from sociological definitions. You get the sense? Yes. Because if you are to say, let us define the word poverty, right? A sociologist has his own definition. A lawyer has his own definition. A business person has his own definition. A psychologist has his own definition of poverty. A psychologist might tell you that there is poverty of the mind, like they deal with the brain. When you talk of sociologists, they talk about a lack of social support. They are sociological in their mind. So sometimes what you say it is right on your side might not be right according to our context of the what of sociological understanding. So sources such as personal documents can be unreliable. Yes, they can be unreliable. We have many people who have cooked their birth years. You know that. Yes. 1962, 1970, that's happened. Those guys who play football. You'll be under 15, but you'll be 19 years of age. So, some forms of secondary data, such as historical documents, may only reflect the views of a single individual rather than representing wider opinions, because they might be biased. When you talk of historical sources, when someone tells a certain history, they might try to favor. They might be biased. They might be one-sided. So it's not always reliable. So let us get into another important issue. Right. So let us look at what we call quantitative data. Let us look at what we call quantitative data. So quantitative data, the word quantitative is from the word quantity. Chloe, what is your understanding of the word quantity?
The amount of something.
Numbers, right? So it is data being represented in numerical form. For example, if I would say the employment rate here is 67%. The word 67 is a number, it's in numerical form. It is representing that information, So that's a raw number, such as the total number of people who live in the society. When you get that figure, that in Zimbabwe we are 16 million people. This represents what? This represents quantitative data. And a percentage of the number of people per 100 in a population, for example, about 80% of Indians follow the Hindu religion. When you get those statistics, that a certain percentage is what and what, right? Those numbers are part and parcel of what we call quantitative data. Like we can also see them birth rate, death rate, that's geography stuff. Right. So, how is it important? The strength. Number one, the ability to express relationships statistically can be useful if the researcher does not need to explore the reasons for people's behavior, if they simply need to compare numbers. Sometimes you just don't want to know about people's behavior, because people's behaviors cannot be put in numbers. Yes. How people act, the people's characters, you cannot quantify it. So, if you are not going into that route, the numbers can help us. So quantitative data allows sociologists to summarize sources of information and make comparisons, and you find out that statistical comparisons and correlations can test whether a hypothesis is true or false. They can also track changes in the behavior of the same group over a long time. We call it a longitudinal studies. Like if you say the number of people who suffer from a certain chronic illness in this area was 52% in 1992. We can also compare and say now we have an improvement. There's been some medicine coming in and stuff. So in 2002, they dropped down to 33%. So it is a longitudinal study. You can do the comparisons. It is fine like that. So quantitative research is more reliable because it is easier to what? To replicate the study. You can repeat the study. Yes, because we have numbers to deal with. And the standardized questions that do not change, for example, can be asked of different groups or the same groups at different times. What might change is the number, the percentage. Are you getting the sense? Let's say we want to ask about the people who are employed or unemployed. You don't need to change the question. In 1991, you can say, are you employed? In 1992, you can say, are you employed? Like, you replicate the study, you can repeat the questions over and over again. What can change are the figures only. But it won't give you the stress of changing the wording or how you are going to what to question. Right, so quantitative data also makes it easier for researchers to remain objective. There is no one who is going to cheat. They do not need to have a close personal involvement with the subject of the study because we are dealing with the numbers. So their personal views or biases are less likely to get into the way or intrude into the data collection process. Because if we say 90%, it's 90%, you cannot change numbers. But however, quantification is often achieved by placing the respondent in sort of what we call an artificial social setting in order to control the responses and the data collected. And that's true. Sometimes a person may not tell the truth because of the environment you have created. You get the sense? Yes. That's why journalism is not really an easy job. People think that journalism is just about asking questions. I often see what is happening on social media nowadays. Because when you're a proper journalist, you have to ask pertinent, or you have to ask real questions to an extent that the viewers or the people who will be following your podcast or stuff can easily tell that this person is telling the truth or what. So some sensational journalists can also ask you questions in the environment that you end up lying. So sometimes they say it is an artificial social setting, whereby people might respond because they are there. Like if you'd ask them, why is they at their place, but yes, it's the context. Yes. It's just like that. Like people try to suit the context in one way or the other. So people rarely, if ever, encounter a situation where they're asked to respond to a list of questions from a stranger or have their behavior observed in a laboratory, right? So you find out that, and sometimes some argue that it is impossible to capture the people's normal behavior or collect real responses when the subjects are placed in such an artificial environment. So sometimes you cannot get the rightful information. Yes, you cannot get it. Why? Because the people are not in their natural environment. So quantitative data only captures a relatively narrow range of information, right? The who, what, where, and when of people's behavior. Then quantitative data does not usually reveal the reasons for behavior. It lacks depth, because if you just tell me that I'm not going to work, then I capture the numbers that the number of people who are not going to work in this street are 97. You did not tell me why are they not going to work. Because quantitative data, we are dealing with figures, with numbers. So if I tell you that only 80 people are married in this street, you didn't tell me why are they married, you just gave me a figure. So that's when qualitative data comes through. Qualitative data is like expressed information in terms of the people's feelings, the ones which you cannot quantify, which you cannot put it across in numbers. That's part and parcel of what we call quantitative, right? So qualitative. So let us move to qualitative data. So qualitative data aims to capture the quality of what? Of people's behaviors by exploring the why rather than the what, where, and when. The why part, right? Why are you into like sex work or prostitution? They can give you an answer. Unlike in quantitative data, you can only say we have the women who are in the sex business, like there are 67 in this street. So qualitative data comes through and asks why are they doing that? Then they can give reasons. It is poverty, it is peer pressure, So it involves question about how people feel about their experiences and can be used to understand the meanings and apply it to behavior. For example, in the USA, according to Venkatesh in 2009, he studied a young gang from the viewpoint of its members. Like while Goffman in 1961 examined the experiences of patients in a mental institution. So both were trying to capture the quality of what? Of people's behavior. They didn't go into mental institutions and just get a number of people who have like medical issues which are mentally related. He lived with them and explored. Like, it's about feeling how they are feeling. Like, that's when you apply the principle of empathy. You have to put yourself in their shoes so that you can understand how they live, how they are surviving, how they are pulling through. So, what the subjects understand, how they feel, and most importantly, why they behave in particular ways in different situations. So this one is important, right? Their strengths thereof, like the aim of qualitative research is to understand people's behavior so that they must be allowed to talk and act freely. Yes? Sometimes when you ask people some personal questions, they might be open to you. Yes, and give you the information. So qualitative data is quite important. So this allows the researcher to capture the complex reasons for behavior. Because if you just give me a figure, it's not clear. But when you ask a deep question about why a person is into sex work, they'll tell you that I was an orphan. Then I started to live with this friend of mine. And this friend of mine was now saying, no, I can't continue to feed you. You've been here for 2 months. I've been going there on the touchline. I've been sleeping with a lot of men. I've been getting some money and coming back to feed you here. Right? So you have to join the bandwagon. We have to work together. So those questions, right, you have to ask. So the interviewer will be asking, why did you join? You know, yes. What was the reason? At what point did you change your mind? So when your friends told you, at what point did you instantly, you know? Yes. So that's what we are referring to as complex questions. You have to ask into that. Yeah, you have to ask, how many men do you sleep with? You know, yes, you'll be researching. So, right, I see, yeah, there's some who even ask about gang members. Yes, how many people do you kill? Yes, they can ask such complex questions because they will be trying to understand what will be happening. So, the researchers have greater freedom to study people in their normal settings. The results are more likely to show how people really behave and what they really believe. But however, it's also disadvantageous. Like qualitative research focuses on the intensive study of relatively small groups. Because since it takes time to be interviewing each and every person, sometimes we just have data or analysis from you can ask 3 people, right? So, which may limit opportunity for applying the data more widely. And such groups may not be representative of anything but themselves. So, yes. No. One or 2 or 3. It's not like the whole thing. But sometimes if you base with one interview, because socialization, location, where you live also socialize who you are. Yes. There are some good people in bad areas, but they are painted with the same black brush. So, the depth and detail of the data also makes such research difficult to replicate. It is hard to replicate because moods changed. You might interview me today while I'm hungry. I might be harsh or rude in my responses. But next week you would come and I'll be feasting on my nandos or my chicken in, and I'll be in a boisterous or I'll be in a good mood. Then, like the information that I told you last week might be different with the information that I told you this week because of the changes of mood. We are human beings, you know. Which means their reliability is generally lower than that of quantitative research. So that's it for today. Right. So next lesson we'll be looking at the strengths and limitations of different sources of data, including official statistics, personal documents, digital content, and media sources. That will be a Friday lesson, because tomorrow I'm not